And welcome back to The Report. This evening, we are diving into an extraordinary discovery that's sending ripples through the scientific world. A potential new contender for the title of the largest terror bird ever found. Now, the study published by IFL Science claims this record-breaking specimen is around 12 million years old. But as we dive into the story, we'll also be taking a closer look at the assumptions underlying these conclusions. What does the discovery really tell us about the supposed relationship between birds and dinosaurs? Could these giants be evidence of an ancient world where larger creatures roamed? And how does this fit into a broader understanding of creation as described in the Bible? Joining us to unpack this topic is Dr. Brian Thomas, an expert in paleobiochemistry and a science writer at the Institute for Creation Research. Through his extensive research and work in the scientific community, Dr. Thomas has dedicated his career to exploring the intricate narratives revealed by these ancient specimens. Brian, it is great to have you back on The Report.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.
I tell you what, we appreciate your research when it comes to soft tissue, original biomolecules. You are really having an impact on the community. But this article that covered this discovery, it mentioned a leg bone of a large terror bird. Now, it turns out that this is basically a fragment of a leg bone. Can you kind of clarify this distinction and why it's important and why it kind of matches with most of what we find in the fossil record?
Sure, thank you. So it's a tibiotarsus, which is something like the tibia that we have. So it's the lower leg bone. It's the end of it, and so that means that the bones, that the carcass of the bird was separated and disarticulated is the word we use, and then not only disarticulated where one bone disconnects from its neighbor, but those bones were fragmented. So that's typical of what we see, not just in these upper level layers that have fossils in them, but even in the lower layers found below and beneath these, where there may be dinosaur remains. It's the same down there. And so what this indicates, whether you're looking at fossils up here or in the middle or down below, as something smashed and crashed these fossils or these bones as they were being emplaced in sediment. So that something implies what? High energy. So we're thinking about we have to have a violent catastrophe that involves a lot of water moving a lot of mud to explain these things.
Yeah, not just high energy, but again, you mentioned a catastrophe. You and I have been on paleontological dig sites before, and most of the bones that we find throughout the fossil world are disarticulated. They seem to be torn apart. In some cases, you're finding things that were buried underneath massive mud layers, and sometimes they're mostly preserved. But the vast majority of time, it looks like this was just some horrible, terrible event that broke apart things and ground them down and then displaced them and then buried them and started the fossilization process. Now, you know, this particular discovery adds to a growing body of evidence showing that many ancient species were significantly larger than pretty much anything we see today. Dinosaurs are a good example. Can you share more about this phenomenon of gigantism and maybe some other examples of oversized prehistoric creatures?
Think about, I think a lot of people have seen those pictures of the giant dragonfly with an almost 4-foot long wingspan. Well, today's dragonflies is just a couple inches of wingspan. That's an arthropod, right? But then we have fossils of like an 8-foot long beaver. Well, the glyptodon, you've heard of the glyptodon, and that's it's like an armadillo that's the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. So these creatures, I mean, it's kind of like you name it, and it was bigger. Bigger cats. Woolly mammoth was a bigger, version of the elephant kind, had a lot of hair on it. So gigantism is the word we use for that. And so the question is, why were creatures larger in the past, and why have they become, generally speaking, smaller in today's world?
Yeah. And that is a question that I know you at ICR, y'all have been researching these types of things, trying to come to a better understanding of not just the gigantism, but also the age limits of these creatures. Could they have lived longer? But the thing is, when it comes to the scientific community, most of the narrative is pushing this birds and dinosaurs comparison. Even this article itself says, now that we know birds are dinosaurs, right? That is a dogmatic statement. We know birds are dinosaurs. Talk about the bird dinosaur issue for just a moment.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it is an assumption, right? Now we know birds are dinosaurs. I think what that comes from is a series of fossils where we have elevated certain extinct birds to the level of being dinosaur, and we have named certain extinct smallish dinosaurs, and we call them birds. And so we're conflating the identification. And so it adds a whole lot of confusion. So you dump all these fossils in a pot, and then whatever a researcher wants to say about it, well, there's these certain similarities to bird, and even though it ends up actually being a dinosaur to other researchers, and then they might look at a bird and say, well, certain similar features to dinosaur, so let's call it a dinosaur. So you've got the misnaming and the misidentification, but with each of these that's been misnamed and misidentified, there's an opponent. There's an opposing view from within the evolutionary community saying, no, that's actually a bird. No, that's actually a dinosaur. And so, but it feeds into if we can call birds dinosaurs and dinosaurs birds, it feeds into what the evolutionary scheme and narrative, and that becomes a new proof of evolution, even though the proof is actually boils down to hype and misidentification, unfortunately.
It does. And again, there are numerous differences between what we would classify birds and what most people would classify dinosaurs. And you have to go to great lengths to think that one could somehow turn into the other. Strides have been made in this attempt by some researchers saying, well, maybe dinosaurs weren't cold-blooded. Maybe they were, since they may be related to birds, maybe they were warm-blooded. Maybe dinosaurs had so many feathers on them. They were like giant chickens, right? There are all of these attempts to try to associate, but at the same time, from what we know from the fossil record, there are a lot of differences. But I think really the key here is to understand that we're talking about what is supposed to be a 12 million year old fossil. And many dinosaur fossils are supposed to be even much older than that, 66 plus million years old. Sort of take us home by talking about your research in soft tissue or original biomolecules and how those finds within these supposedly millions of year old fossils are challenging what we've been told by the secular community.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so yeah, those are the age assignments that you just named, those numbers. And those age assignments, we have to have an old, those are evolutionary ages. I don't agree with them. But so they pull the fossil out and they say the fossil came from this layer, and then they consult some book which has some chart in it that someone else made. So there's a assurance that they're on the right track because this is what the other guys have said about it. That's basically where the science goes. But and then with the dinosaur, you have to assign an age that's 66 million or whatever, just because that's what's in the charts. But the data, as you mentioned, the data from the blood vessels that are in these fossils, the blood vessels now, and other original biochemicals and tissue fragments, they're still in there, that they can't last even 1 million years. And so we have over 120, we're about to 125 secular published technical journal articles. One that just came out this week that I co-authored in the journal Analytical Chemistry, where we found protein in an Edmontosaurus the protein shouldn't be there if it's that old, if it's even a fraction of the age assignment. So I think these died in the flood. I think these are Noah's flood related flood fossils. That explains the water, the violence, the catastrophe, and the fresh look of these proteins.
I believe that I would concur on every front with you. I really appreciate your research. It is really groundbreaking what you're doing, and thank you so much for being here to speak into these issues and to talk about things that are coming up on a daily basis, but that when you actually dive deep, they're really pointing us right back to biblical authority and the truth of the gospel. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. And it's time to take a quick break, but we are going to be right back with more on the Genesis Science Report.